Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response, built on the ServiceNow platform used by over 6,000 companies worldwide. Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well here in the middle of July, sort of the dog days of summer 2022. It is very hot here in North Carolina, but I think it's very hot sort of all over the place. We're seeing record heat here in the United States, record heat in the UK, over 40 degrees Celsius, which I guess has never been recorded in the UK, which for those of you that may have some opinions on global warming, the numbers due in climate change, the numbers keep smacking us in the face. So this is not a show about climate change, but it does impact all of us. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to get right to Cloud News of the Week. We have a little bit of a busy week. We're getting to, again, the beginning of cloud earnings season. We tend to have IBM tends to go a week before, and then we'll have Amazon, Azure, and Google reporting next week, and then sometimes there's some stragglers after that. But let's get right to Cloud News of the Week. IBM did report their earnings. They were up 9% year over year. So IBM continuing to have a little bit of turnaround in terms of, a lot of the changes they've been making, spinning off a lot of their consulting business to Kyndryl and, doubling down on the focus they had with Red Hat. So up 9%. But the big winner for IBM this quarter was mainframes. A new mainframe came out. It was up 19% year over year. So, for all of you that are doubting the mainframe, downplaying the mainframe, thinking it's gone, think again. It continues to sell well, continues to grow. So congratulations to IBM on their quarter. Second piece of news for this week, a little bit interesting. Netflix, who, historically has always sort of made their name as being not having any ads, not interrupting any of their shows with ads, and obviously being subscription-based. I've been looking at some new models, some new revenue models and new ways of monetizing their business, especially after the pandemic and people are, changing their watching patterns. And so they are adopting a advertising-driven model. All the details aren't totally worked out yet. But one of the big things that came out was Netflix announced that Microsoft will be helping them with the technology to drive ads for their platform. So a big win for Netflix. Sort of interesting that they maybe didn't go with Amazon or Google or some others that have some huge ad networks, but this is a big win for Microsoft. It'll be interesting to see if it parlays into any of the other streaming services, a Disney, a Hulu, ESPN Plus, any of those types of services that are out there. Microsoft continues to innovate in new and interesting ways, and the cloud wars, whether they're at the cloud level or at the ad level, continue to go on between the big 3, 4, 5 companies. Another big thing in the news for Microsoft this week was they're doubling down on cloud sovereignty. So bringing what they call Microsoft adding cloud for sovereignty to a number of their offerings, especially around the Office 365 offering, really trying to create some isolated environments, especially for countries in which data has to remain in country. And so that's being added to attract new government customers. So if you're in the government space or any of the, agencies or customers in which your data must remain within the country of origin, definitely something to take a look at. And then finally, and we never like to sort of cover bad news, I guess, per se, but, the VMware acquisition by Broadcom is probably going to be in the news, I would say, at least till the end of this year. The deal still hasn't, I don't believe, officially closed yet. There's been some announcements. We've covered it a couple of times on the show. We covered last week that the person who was slated to cover or sort of lead VMware going forward, or what's going to be Broadcom software that includes VMware, left to go to run Citrix. And so there's going to be lots of speculation about what's going on. But one thing we did see that Craig McLuckie, who had formerly run Heptio along with Joe Beta, announced that he was leaving VMware, was retiring, or at least leaving VMware for the time being. Joe Beta a couple of weeks ago announced that he was sort of retiring or leaving technology for a while. Those were the two people that had sort of not only founded Kubernetes back in their days at Google, had started a company called Heptio, which eventually got acquired by VMware, was really supposed to be the engine, the expertise, the leadership that was going to help drive VMware Tanzu. And as we've talked about, the future of VMware Tanzu in the new Broadcom ecosystem is still up in the air. We'll see what happens with it. Dave Vellante and I both sort of dug into that quite a bit. But interesting to see both of the sort of Kubernetes leaders of VMware having retired. It's been almost 4 years now since the acquisition of Heptio, so that's not completely unusual. But we definitely want to keep track of not only technology trends, but people trends, where people are, where they're moving, and so forth. So that's going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. We're going to be doing a number of shows over the next couple of weeks, this week included, looking at different aspects of Kubernetes. We've covered Kubernetes quite a bit in the early days. It's become much more mainstream. I ran an entire podcast for a while called PodCTL, which still exists out there if you kind of want to dig into Kubernetes. But I feel like, with KubeCon coming back to Detroit here in October and Kubernetes, again, becoming much more mainstream, be good to kind of refresh Kubernetes, dig into a lot of different areas of that. So we're going to get to some aspects of Kubernetes right after the break. Today's sponsor is Datadog, a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. Datadog's container-centric monitoring features allow you to track the health and performance of your dynamic container environment. The Container Map provides a bird's-eye view of your container fleet, and the Live Container View searches, groups, and filters your containers with any criteria, like tags, pods, or workspaces. To start monitoring your container clusters, sign up for a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/container-cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/container-cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, as you know, if you've been paying attention, and I know you have, Kubernetes is a big deal. We've been covering Kubernetes ever since the very first KubeCon more than 6 years ago, and steadily and at times very quickly, Kubernetes is becoming not only kind of the de facto way that we deploy container applications and multi-cloud and hybrid cloud applications, but it's really become mainstream to the point where we don't necessarily talk about all the cool things going into Kubernetes. We're really talking about, how do we just run it day to day? It's become a little more stable than it was 2 or 3 years ago. Not as many features are going in, and people are really looking at, how do I put this into production? How do I improve what I have in production? And one of the areas that we haven't necessarily covered a lot of, we've covered a lot of things around, features and new companies and so forth, but we've never really dug into, how do we make sure that we're testing the environments and the applications of the environments well, because Kubernetes is a little different. It does things a little bit different. And today we're really excited to have Ken Ahrens, who is co-founder of Speedscale. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Nice to meet you.
So I want to dive a little bit into your background, because you have a rich technical background as somebody who's a founder, but you've been in this space of making sure that operations people's lives are a little easier than they should be, or a little easier because they're difficult. But give us a little bit of your background, and then more importantly, get us up to speed with Speedscale and why you started it, where you guys are focused.
Great, thanks. So for a little bit about my background, we've been working on Speedscale for about 2.5 years, myself and my two co-founders, Nate and Matt. And before Speedscale, I spent several years at New Relic working on application monitoring and infrastructure monitoring, especially we saw as people move to the cloud. And increasingly, we're putting workloads in Kubernetes. Before New Relic, I always kind of had a big interest in startups. I spent several years at a startup called ITKO, and we focused all around APIs, integrations, how applications talk to each other, and how to solve testing problems when apps don't talk to each other that well. We were acquired by CA in 2011, and then kind of going back one generational hop before that, I cut my teeth in the monitoring space at a company called Wiley Technology, which was one of the first Java monitoring solutions that was out there when Java was really new and fresh. You'd build your apps and deploy them all, and then trying to figure out why is everything running out of memory and how do we scale it and that kind of thing.
Yep. Very cool. So give folks who may not have heard of Speedscale just a little quick sort of TLDR, who the company is, where you're based, where you guys focus on things.
Sure. So Speedscale is a SaaS platform that you can use to load and performance test your applications that are running in the containerized workloads. We focus a lot on Kubernetes, and people say, well, testing is not that hard. You can sit down and write kind of that hello world test in about 5 minutes. What we use is a concept called traffic replay, because while hello world is nice and I can go hit kind of the homepage or I can hit the base API that's being called, that's not how your app really is run. I spent many years in production to learn that there's a long tail of different ways that apps can get called, and it's that exact mix that happens in production environments that is really hard to replicate in non-prod. I spend a lot of time personally kind of helping companies monitor their systems and at times get involved with incidents and outages. And at that point, you're out of good choices. You have to pick from your set of poor choices of what you want to do, whether it's restarting things or trying to get more infrastructure so you can scale up. We wanted to help people have that ability to understand how things scale way back in non-prod land. And we do that by this concept of traffic replay we can dig into a little bit further.
Yeah. I want to step back just a bit because I do want to dive into replay. I mentioned at the intro, Kubernetes has gone very mainstream, but what we still do here, it's very interesting. It does automation in kind of cool ways. It scales in ways that you couldn't easily do before, but it's still kind of hard to operate. How do you see people getting comfortable operating it and sort of what works well, what doesn't work well, and then I guess more importantly, where you guys start fitting into bringing the test element to make it easier to operate?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because I actually was just thinking about this. I've probably been a daily driver of Kubernetes for about 3 years. And, our infrastructure runs in Kubernetes. It is significantly easier these days than it was 3 years ago to get your cluster up and running and kind of keep it running. Right. Day two. And the cloud vendors have done a phenomenal job here in getting a stable version and distribution of Kubernetes. And, frankly, there's a lot of great options for people. We run a lot of our services in AWS, but you can click a button and get one in Google Cloud. You actually can also even connect into your data center kind of workloads, VMs, and there are services that you can get that will automatically create and provision your environment properly. And the automation to go and build the environment solves a ton of problems for you. And now I can take advantage of the portability, because if I can get everything deployed really easily, I can also spin up another cluster and do a failover. That was one of the first things we did when we had Speedscale. We messed up a cluster and we did a disaster recovery. It actually was really fast, much faster than I had thought, because all our manifests were there and we were able to run it and point the load balancer, and we were good to go.
Nice. So I well, at least in my previous role, I still am around Kubernetes quite a bit, but so Kubernetes has had, I would call it testing for a while. If you were a distribution of Kubernetes, you had to get kind of certified by the CNCF. So there was a set of tests you had to run. Eventually, Heptio came out with something called Sonabuoy, which kind of did this conformance testing. What you guys do is different, though. It's a little more of a mix, as I understand it, of really kind of how to operationalize those clusters, but also, how the applications run. Like, give me a sense of what those other types of testing we're doing, and really, where you guys fit into the bigger picture in terms of helping people.
Yeah, definitely. If you just use the word test, you'd say, hold on a second, right? But basically, what I just said a minute ago about all the cloud providers, they're the ones who are running those tests to say this cluster is compliant. This is a K3S cluster, for example. Like I'm testing out some stuff with Civo. They do hosted K3S, which is kind of cool. And actually, we did some stuff with Rancher in the Rancher team, and Rancher Desktop is K3S. So those, you have to certify. My Kubernetes control plane is good. We're focused on the apps that you run on Kubernetes. So if you just say, hey, I don't want to, if you take the old example of I've got a cloud native application that needs load balancers, API gateways, VPC configurations and all these things, and you move the problem over to Kubernetes, it could be as simple as some deployments and some services.
Right.
So we're focused on testing those deployments and those services, and not necessarily the control plane itself. And so this actually is one of our kind of SEO challenges of getting our name out there and having people hear about us, because there are other tools for testing the Kubernetes infrastructure itself. But usually people kind of get what we're talking about. We're focused on the apps, your own workloads that are running on there. How many nodes do I need? How should I configure, the capacity that's required for each of my pods? And you can get those answers through better testing of your own workloads.
Yeah. You guys have this interesting functionality called traffic replay. Give us a sense of sort of what that is, how it works, because I can imagine for a lot of companies, people build test environments. They've got mocked up databases, mocked up services, traffic loads. But there's also going to be times when things get into production. Kind of put the pieces together for me in terms of what traffic replay does and where you often see it used by different companies.
So there's a couple different aspects to this. One has to do with the creation of test cases themselves. So when we started the company, actually, we were focused on environments, and we thought people had test cases, but it can be difficult to run them all the time because you have things like data that gets changed that has to be reset and restaged, or things like my application does some interesting function with the third-party service or API. I have to call Salesforce, I have to charge somebody, I have to call PayPal or Stripe or something like that. And having the environment for your own app as well as the calls to the third party are tricky. So we actually started by focusing on that part of the problem. And we said, hey, we've got these mocked APIs. You've got some clusters running, right? Sure. And why don't you run your tests? And people were like, well, while you're in there and gathering the data to mock out these third APIs, could you supply some tests? And we realized, although there's a lot of testing tools available, people don't really have time to sit down and write and build these tests. And all they've got is a little curl that they hit, or maybe a little unit test and that kind of thing. But they don't actually have these integration tests not running in a consistent, repeatable way. So for us as the startup, that was kind of part two, was, now that we've got the ability to mock out the backends, we supplied the tests that can go into the services as well. And I'll just dig in one layer deeper on that. If you think about a set of microservices and you start to take your engineering team and split them up across the microservices, someone's sitting in the middle, right? And they depend on the ingress getting hit, and then, some authentication service getting called. Finally, the call comes to their service. It's not totally obvious. What's the network call going to look like when it hits it? What are all the headers that are going to be on it? Will they get stripped off? If I use a service mesh, what's happening to my data? And they have to update their code and push it into prod. And maybe they don't really know exactly how everything is going to get wired up end to end. And we help them with that problem by letting them isolate their component from everything else and run it even like on your own Minikube if you want.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. And that's super important because, as much as we talk about these sort of, things that sound great at DevOps days where it's like you write the code, you manage it all, you're a full stack developer, so many times, we talk to companies and they go, I don't totally know how stuff gets deployed. I write my code, it sort of goes into Git, like you said, I might be able to do some testing, but I can't always tell what's going to happen. And companies are getting better about that stuff. But yeah, having the ability to isolate things out, sort of know ahead of time what might happen, what should happen, that's super important.
Just like you said, I actually literally wrote something about the challenges of the full stack developer. Just today, I was making some notes about this. It's very difficult to say I'm an expert in this language. I understand the network calls. I understand how this thing's going to get deployed. I'm familiar with the monitoring system. I'm going to get alerted or paged and this kind of thing. And the list of responsibilities for that kind of end-to-end full stack developers pretty enormous. So we're focused on trying to provide some tools that make life better. And whenever you can touch and feel and run things and kind of locally on your own machine, it helps build your confidence. And you say, okay, I know this part's working. Let me add something. I know that's working now. Let me run it. And one other area we're real focused on is around performance optimization. And there's no end to the theories of how this code could get better. But there's nothing better than actually running the tests and proving it. What if we update the version of Java? Turns out no change, right? What if we update to the next version of Python? Holy cow, huge improvement. You don't really know until you start to run things. And by the time something's in production, if you do encounter a problem, like I said earlier, you're real limited on what you can do. And no one really likes testing, figure things out earlier. You've got confidence when it's time to ship.
Yeah. And and I know a lot of people sort of they sort of think through how they do everything from like testing to deployment. So you'll talk to people and they'll go, well, yeah, we're now using something like K3S locally on the laptop, and we're kind of doing inner loop development. And then maybe we're using GitOps to deploy things. And hey, Kubernetes has this built-in sort of blue-green thing, so we can do canaries or blue-greens. Like a lot of times it feels like those things are sort of pieced together. Some group, worried about like the desktop element of it. The other group, platform team thought about deployments. Where do you guys tend to see yourself, going in, helping people evaluate their Kubernetes environments and kind of going, oh, well, initially we tend to fit in sort of here. And then, oftentimes we'll expand out into these other areas. What's the typical sort of adoption thing, and where are you typically kind of adopted into? What else is typically around you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because human nature is what's the most recent thing that's happened is typically what's driving your next behavior.
Yeah.
In some cases, what we're hearing is, I would say a little bit of the time we hear people say, hey, we've got a big release coming up and we're going to make a lot of changes. And so we want to do some proactive testing. So there's a little bit of folks who do that. They search for things like Kubernetes load testing. They find our product, read about us, and sign up for a trial. And at other times we hear kind of we've been dealing with incidents and we're really reactive right now. And so we want to try to get out in front of this. And again, similarly, people and we've done some integrations with like New Relic and Datadog, for example, so that we can cross the divide between people who are monitoring systems in production, but also want to understand the performance in pre-prod. And that's not a bad spot for us. And so in one case, we might be brought in by an API developer who knows that they've got some big changes coming. But in other cases, it's maybe someone who's like an SRE, and they just know we're dealing with too many incidents. We're not helping with toil. We're just running around firefighting. And frankly, they join our Slack community, they sign up for a trial, and we roll up our sleeves and try to start helping.
Yeah. What do you tend to see? You guys have been doing this for a little while. What do you tend to see as kind of tangible, things that people perceive as value? Oftentimes it's, additional testing, additional automation. You sort of know you have to do it. Sometimes it gets backburnered, but like, what are some of the sort of immediate things, whether they're sort of at a metrics level or customer satisfaction level? Like, what kind of feedback do you get when people go like, hey, we made the effort, we started doing this, and ...
Sure. So I'll tell a story of one of my customers is a company called Nihilus. They have software that kind of synchronizes all these email inboxes. Think of your support people, everyone's emailing customers. They can sync the data from everyone's inboxes and get a better view into how your company is communicating with customers, right? So they wanted to migrate off of EC2 onto Kubernetes for a couple of reasons, for some scalability improvements and also some portability of their application. And first thing they did, they took the most important component of their app, which is called Sync, which syncs with the third-party email providers, and they're trying to run some tests. Well, in production, it's very common that you'll connect to tens of thousands of inboxes, and the inboxes are full of emails. Well, in the test lab, they got 3 emails, 3 email accounts, and they each have about 20 emails in them. And we got connected with them because they reached out that they were migrating to Kubernetes. And we just started by saying, let's make a baseline of the performance. How many can you sync? How many emails can you sync? And they had a goal. And in about 3 months of working with Speedscale, they improved the sync performance by 30x. So they're, for the same amount of infrastructure, they could do 30 times as much processing of this most expensive component. And the key was we mocked out the calls to Google Gmail and to Microsoft's Exchange API, Microsoft's Graph API. And that enabled their engineering team to do all this rapid iteration. Let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try to actually move part of their code to Go. And, they also, frankly, took advantage of some of the Kubernetes infrastructure. So they rewrote their code a little bit better to run as microservices. So in their case, it was a direct application performance improvement.
What are some of the areas you see, where people, oftentimes struggle? They'll tell you, well, hey, we think we do testing well. And is it really that they just don't have enough time to do it well? Or are there some unique things that you guys do, especially, with the ability to mock up services, the ability to isolate things, that is really kind of a different way of thinking about testing in the Kubernetes world? Or maybe it's just, hey, we have these applications, we think we've built them well, but just getting them to Kubernetes is just this weird world. What's oftentimes the thing that you have to help shift people into kind of, having the right mindset for Kubernetes and then the right kind of tools and frameworks to work with?
So if you ask people, hey, do you test your code? And do you have some way to test it? And I ran a survey, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to find out all these people who told me they don't have testing, right? It's going to be low score. So we found about 90% of people said, yeah, we're running tests. And if you ask people, do you think you have the right amount of testing? Almost nobody feels that they do. So they're definitely doing some tasks. We're writing unit tests. The code is functionally correct. It's running the function the way that you want. But people have low confidence for some of the things you talked about earlier. Now it's going to get packaged in a container. Now it's going to get put in a cluster somewhere. Now it's going to be scaled in a way that's different than I had originally planned. So what we're trying to do is bring that production experience, shift that back left, right? To use that kind of overloaded term. So how's it going to be run in production, with how many replicas, with what scale, and what type of cluster and environment? And as soon as you start to talk about that, people will tell you all the reasons why it's not possible. And basically, our product is a solution for all those reasons. I can't do it because the data is wrong. Okay, well, we can bring the data with it. I can't do it because I depend on these other APIs, and I don't have cloud sandboxes for those. So part of our secret sauce is the ability to mock out these endpoints, including all the network calls, and your app doesn't know it's not talking to the real thing. And that's actually one of the fun experiences when we do a trial. And people invariably get to this spot. They say, I ran a bunch of workloads and nothing changed. And that actually means it's working. Your app doesn't know it's not talking to the real, end-to-end system. And then once we have that, we'll go and plug it into CI, and we can build these guardrails. And the guardrails look something like, hey, this has got to respond under 100 milliseconds and handle 50 transactions per second. And now we can check that in pre-prod every time you want to do a merge. And all of a sudden, the teams start to have this much greater confidence. Hey, I want to do a big refactoring thing. The functionality works. How's the performance change? And kind of over on the operations side, what we see people doing is saying, what if I take advantage of one of these new CPU architectures? We actually had another customer who tested out like the Graviton processors from AWS to ARM processors, and we're using them ourselves. We actually saved a bunch of money by moving a bunch of our workloads over to ARM, which had a better unit economics for us and didn't change the code at all. We just had to change some build instructions and a lot of manifests. Run this on the ARM server.
Nice. Yeah, no, and the ARM stuff is super powerful these days, especially with the cost savings they get, and being able to confidently know you can move that stuff over to ARM is a big deal these days. I suspect we'll be seeing more and more people doing that, especially if the economy gets tighter, or just all sorts of stories about how much sometimes Kubernetes costs if you're not terribly efficient with what you do. So very cool. I want to be conscious of your time real quick. If folks want to engage with you guys, what's the best way to get started? What's the best way to engage with your team and figure out how to start testing better, and ultimately how to start running services and applications better?
Well, you can find us on our website, speedscale.com, and read our blogs. We're constantly trying to post our learnings and updates. Actually, one of the blogs we're working on right now is about our migration to ARM processors. We've got a community that you can sign up for, slack.speedscale.com, and jump in and engage and ask questions about traffic replay. We offer free trials for our software, including some tutorials for how to run everything on a Minikube, because that's something we also sometimes hear is, well, the clusters might be locked down or they're run by another team. And one of the cool things about the portability of Kubernetes is actually you can spin up a cluster anywhere by clicking a couple buttons, and you can even run it on pretty much any machine. I even got a Windows machine here. You can run Minikube on Windows. Everything works. So those are the best places to find us, speedscale.com. And, we're obviously on LinkedIn and Twitter and all that stuff too. You can add us and fire away questions.
Good stuff. Well, Ken, thank you so much. Like I said, we've covered Kubernetes for a long time. We haven't necessarily covered this aspect of it, but I think, as I mentioned at the top, as Kubernetes becomes more mainstream, more people trust it for production, especially if you've got more and more teams using it and they're distributed teams, having the capabilities of Speedscale and the right kind of testing is super important. So thank you for the insights today. Folks, on behalf of Aaron and I, we want to thank Ken for his time. We want to thank all of you for listening week in and week out. And hopefully your summer's going well, your summer vacations are going well. And thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show and grow the community. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.